When you're looking to buy a house or even just rent a new apartment, everyone always gives you the exact same piece of advice.
Right, the classic real estate wisdom.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
They tell you, like, do not get distracted by the superficial stuff. Because you walk in and you see this beautiful, crisp, fresh coat of paint on the walls.
Oh, for sure. The staging is perfect.
Right. Maybe there's some really nice staging. The lighting is perfectly calibrated to make the living room look twice as big.
Mhm.
The floors are polished. I mean, it looks flawless.
It looks completely move-in ready.
But then the inspector comes in, and they completely ignore all of that. They do not care about the aesthetic choices at all. They go straight down to the basement.
Yeah, they're looking for the real story.
Exactly. They're walking around with a flashlight, looking for, the hairline cracks in the foundation, the moisture in the joists, the structural integrity. Because they're looking for the things that actually hold the house up when a Category 5 storm hits.
Well, because the fresh paint is entirely aesthetic. I mean, it is designed to make you feel good in the moment. It looks pleasant to the observer, but it does absolutely none of the heavy lifting.
None of it.
Right, if the foundation is compromised, that really expensive coat of paint isn't going to stop the walls from caving in on you. It is a cosmetic solution to a structural problem.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yep.
Because we are taking on a topic today that I think society generally treats a lot like that fresh coat of paint. We're doing a deep dive into an incredibly dense set of excerpts from a show called The Inner Horizon.
And it is a fantastic source.
It really is.
Yeah.
Specifically, we're looking at an installment featuring a psychologist named Mark, and the entire focus of this piece is on compassion.
Which is such a loaded word, honestly.
It is. And the mission of this deep dive, the reason we are tearing into this specific material for you today, is to completely deconstruct the way we usually talk about this concept. Mark's work forces us to stop looking at compassion as some, fluffy, feel-good greeting card sentiment.
Typical stuff.
Yeah, and instead analyze it as a highly tangible, practical, and heavily structural tool for mental and physical survival.
What's fascinating here is how the source material immediately redefines the baseline, like right from the start. The host of The Inner Horizon and the psychologist, Mark, establish right out of the gate that we need a fundamental paradigm shift.
A complete overhaul of how we view it.
Exactly. They argue that compassion is not just about being nice. And that distinction is, well, it's critical, because most of us understand compassion as a passive trait.
Right? We think of nice people as just, easygoing.
Yeah, when we think of someone who is nice, we usually envision someone who is agreeable, someone who doesn't cause friction, someone who smiles, someone who stays out of the way. Niceness is essentially a state of non-aggression.
It's just doing no harm.
Exactly. But Mark defines compassion very specifically as a mechanical two-step process. He says it is the ability to first notice suffering and then actively choose to respond with care.
Notice and respond. I mean, that requires actual movement.
It requires labor. It is empathy in action. And the text makes a crucial distinction here that we really need to linger on, because this empathy in action is entirely distinct from pity.
I want to dig into that distinction, actually, because I think a lot of people, myself included at times, confuse the two. Pity and compassion.
That's a very common mix-up.
Yeah, they feel like they live in the same emotional neighborhood, right?
Yeah.
If I see someone struggling, I feel bad for them. Isn't that the starting point for both of those?
Well, they might originate from a similar observation of someone else's pain, but they occupy completely different architectural spaces in human psychology.
Okay, how so?
If we look at the underlying dynamics Mark is outlining, pity inherently involves a hierarchy. It involves a power dynamic. Pity looks down on suffering.
Oh, wow. I never thought about it like that.
Yeah, when you pity someone, you are standing on the shore, safe and dry, looking at someone drowning in the water and saying, "Oh, you poor thing, that looks terrible."
While you just stay perfectly dry?
Right. It creates distance. It separates you, the secure observer, from the person who is actually struggling. Pity says, "I am over here, and you are over there."
So pity is almost isolating for the person receiving it then. I mean, if I'm the one drowning and you were just standing on the shore pointing out how terrible it is that I'm drowning, you haven't actually helped me.
Not at all.
You've just reminded me of the massive gap between my current state in your current state.
Exactly. It reinforces their isolation. It cements the idea that they are completely alone in their suffering. But compassion, as defined by Mark as empathy in action, meets suffering at eye level.
It levels the playing field.
It does. You aren't looking down from the shore. You are getting into the water with them. You are recognizing their shared humanity, which is a really specific phrase used in the source material. It's the realization that your suffering is my suffering. It is the obliteration of that hierarchy.
Which brings me back to that house analogy we started with. If being nice, or even just feeling pity, is just that superficial fresh coat of paint, like it looks polite, it avoids conflict, it acknowledges the house exists, but doesn't change anything structurally, then this empathy in action, this true compassion, is actually getting down into the dirt and repairing the foundation.
That is a perfect way to look at it.
But, I have to challenge this just a bit. How does moving from just being nice to practicing actionable empathy actually change our daily interactions?
What do you mean?
Well, because if I'm walking around my office just trying to be nice, my main objective is usually just to get through my day without stepping on anyone's toes. I'm preserving my own energy.
And that is the crux of the behavioral shift Mark is advocating for in the text. If your goal is just to be nice, your primary objective is avoidance.
Avoidance, right?
You are avoiding discomfort, avoiding difficult conversations, avoiding acknowledging pain, because pain is incredibly messy.
Super messy.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to deal with it.
Right. Pain demands a response that we often feel completely ill-equipped to give. But if your operating system shifts to the compassion outlined in the text, your daily interactions become deeply intentional and, frankly, much more demanding.
Because you can't just look away anymore.
Exactly. When you see a colleague struggling, the nice thing to do might be to look away, give them privacy, and pretend you didn't notice so they don't feel embarrassed. The compassionate thing to do, the active choice, is to acknowledge it and offer a response of care. You move from a passive observer of the world to an active participant in the emotional ecosystem around you.
That requires an immense amount of courage, though. It requires stepping into the mess. And because the source establishes this compassion as an active repair of those foundational connections, it seamlessly transitions into this incredible primary analogy used in the Inner Horizon.
The bridge analogy.
Yes. The host of that show paints a picture of compassion as a bridge.
The bridge metaphor is very deliberate, and it serves as the architectural blueprint for everything Mark discusses regarding interpersonal healing.
So the text states that compassion is a bridge connecting us to others, reminding us that we aren't alone, and making the burden lighter when shared. But I want to hold that up to the light for a second.
We do it.
Let's really look at the mechanics of sharing a burden. Because if you are carrying a 50-pound boulder on your back, compassion doesn't magically turn it into a feather.
No, the physics don't change.
Right. The objective weight of whatever you are going through, whether it's, the loss of a parent, a massive financial crisis, or chronic anxiety, that remains exactly the same. So how does this bridge actually make anything lighter?
To understand that, we have to examine the psychology of isolation and suffering. When an individual is experiencing intense emotional or psychological pain, the human mind has a very strange, counterintuitive defense mechanism.
It just lets down.
It turns inward. We build walls. We convince ourselves that our specific flavor of suffering is entirely unique to us and therefore no one else could possibly understand it. We tell ourselves, my grief is different or my failure is more profound than anyone else's.
Wow. We trap ourselves on an island. We become the sole inhabitant of our own disaster.
And that isolation acts as a massive acoustic amplifier for the pain.
An amplifier, right?
The suffering reverberates in the echo chamber of our own minds, making it feel infinitely heavier and more dangerous. So why does sharing a burden make it lighter even if the objective weight hasn't changed? Because human beings are fundamentally social creatures.
We need each other to survive.
Biologically wired for connection. Our evolutionary survival depended entirely on the pack. When we are isolated, our nervous system perceives that isolation as a literal threat to our survival. We are a lone wolf separated from the pack, which historically meant death.
So you aren't just carrying the 50-pound boulder, you are carrying the boulder while your brain is screaming that you are in mortal danger of being abandoned.
Precisely. The isolation is a secondary compounding trauma.
So the burden is the event itself, plus the terror of facing it alone.
Exactly. When that bridge of compassion is built, when someone else steps onto that bridge, looks at you and says, I see your burden and I acknowledge it, it down-regulates the nervous system's threat response.
Turns off the alarm.
The panic of isolation subsides. The objective weight of the boulder is still 50 pounds, but you are no longer wasting vital psychological energy managing the terror of being alone with it. The perception of shared humanity neutralizes the secondary suffering of isolation.
That distinction is vital. It changes the whole goal from fixing the problem to just removing the isolation around the problem. And the text goes even further than just the emotional relief of that bridge.
It goes straight into the biology.
Yeah, Mark, the psychologist, brings in these very specific data-backed claims that I think a lot of people might initially roll their eyes at. He states unequivocally that compassion reduces stress, strengthens relationships, and actually improves physical health.
The mind-body connection is front and center in his analysis, absolutely.
But I need you to draw the map for me here. Because for a listener who is highly analytical, it is easy to nod along and say, sure, emotional warmth makes me feel fuzzy inside.
Right. It sounds a bit woo-woo.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But how do we make the leap from this invisible emotional bridge of connection to actual measurable physical health? Like, is this bridge just a beautiful poetic metaphor to make us feel better about being nice to people, or is it a physiological reality? Let's talk about the how.
It is absolutely a physiological reality.
Right.
We can extrapolate exactly how this works based strictly on Mark's claim connecting compassion to the reduction of stress.
Okay, lay it out.
We have to look at what stress actually is. Stress is not just a fleeting feeling of being overwhelmed. It is a highly toxic, corrosive physical state when it becomes chronic.
It breaks you down.
Literally. When you are isolated and suffering, as we just discussed, your body perceives a survival threat. In response, your endocrine system floods your body with stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline.
The fight or flight response.
Exactly. Your fight or flight system is constantly engaged. Your heart rate is elevated, your blood vessels constrict, your digestive system shuts down, and your immune system is suppressed because your body is diverting all resources to immediate survival.
So your body is essentially preparing to run from a predator that doesn't physically exist.
Yes. And if that alarm bell is ringing constantly because you are trapped on that island of isolated suffering, it takes a massive physical toll on the cellular architecture of the body. You get chronic inflammation, hypertension, immune degradation.
That is terrifying.
It is. Now introduce the bridge. Introduce empathy and action from another human being. When you receive compassion, your brain registers a profound shift in its environment. It registers safety.
Because someone else is there.
Yes. The perception of safety signals the amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, to stand down. The sympathetic nervous system disengages, and the parasympathetic nervous system takes over.
The rest and digest mode.
Exactly. The production of cortisol halts, the heart rate slows, blood pressure drops.
So by actively reducing the psychological terror of isolation through the shared connection of compassion, you are actively stopping the physical wear and tear on your internal organs.
The leap from emotional warmth to physical health isn't magic or poetry. It is the direct, mechanical, biological consequence of moving from a state of threatened isolation to a state of connected safety. Mark is pointing to the fact that when you offer compassion to someone, you are quite literally altering their biochemistry.
Wow, that completely reframes the stakes of a basic human interaction. But, here is where the course material takes a pivot that I think is incredibly challenging.
The inward pivot.
Yeah, because a bridge, no matter how beautifully engineered, no matter how much it lowers blood pressure or reduces cortisol, is completely useless if it's anchored to a crumbling, unstable cliff on your side of the river.
Right, you can't build on a sinkhole.
Exactly. You can't reach out to someone else if the ground beneath you is giving way.
A structure can only bear weight if its anchors are secure.
So here's where it gets really interesting. The text argues that compassion must begin within. Mark introduces this concept of self-compassion, and he doesn't just call it a nice bonus. He calls it the missing piece in healing.
It is the foundation that the entire bridge relies upon, yet it is the piece we most frequently neglect.
Almost always.
Yeah.
The source gives this really poignant clinical example. Mark talks about a client he worked with who was extremely self-critical. She had been trapped in years of shame.
Paralyzing shame.
And according to the text, it wasn't until she started practicing self-compassion that she actually began to heal. I want to look at the mechanics of shame for a second. If I can contribute an analogy here, we were talking about physical health and the immune system a minute ago.
Okay, yeah.
It seems to me that shame is almost like an autoimmune response of the psyche. Like in a healthy body, the immune system attacks foreign pathogens to protect you. But in an autoimmune disease, the body's defense system gets confused and starts attacking its own healthy cells.
That is brilliant.
It destroys the very thing it is supposed to protect. Is that what's happening mechanically when Mark talks about harsh self-criticism?
That is a remarkably accurate way to conceptualize the text's premise. If we look closely at how the source frames this, self-compassion is positioned as the direct antidote to harsh self-criticism.
An antidote.
Yes, and an antidote isn't just a soothing balm, it is a specific chemical cure designed to neutralize a specific poison. In Mark's framework, the poison is shame.
But why is shame such a lethal poison to our psychological growth? Like, what is it doing to us, mechanically speaking, that requires such a potent antidote?
If we connect this to the bigger picture of human development and behavioral psychology, shame inherently halts personal growth because it equates an action with an identity.
Oh, wait, break that down for me.
Sure, guilt says I did something bad. Shame says I am bad.
Wow, that is a massive difference.
It is everything. When you are operating from a place of intense self-criticism, when your psychological immune system is attacking your core identity, you are essentially putting yourself on trial every single minute of the day. You are serving as the judge, the jury, and the executioner.
You can never win that trial.
Never. In that internal environment, failure is not seen as a learning opportunity or a temporary setback. It is perceived as a fatal character flaw. Shame paralyzes us with judgment. You cannot move forward, you cannot take risks, and you certainly cannot heal if you are constantly expending all your energy dodging your own internal attacks.
You are pinned down by friendly fire.
Exactly.
You can want to heal, you can want to build bridges to other people, but you are paralyzed because your own internal monologue is constantly telling you that you aren't worthy of the bridge in the first place.
And look at the specific wording Mark uses in the text regarding his client's breakthrough. He says that self-compassion gave her permission to grow without judgment.
Permission to grow.
That is the mechanism of the antidote. It creates a safe, internal environment. It provides the psychological safety required to be a flawed, suffering human being who is capable of making mistakes, observing those mistakes neutrally, and learning from them without the paralyzing threat of internal punishment. It turns off the autoimmune attack.
I think this brings up a really crucial point of reflection for you listening right now. I want you to honestly evaluate your own internal monologue for a second. Think about the last time you dropped the ball.
We all do it.
Right? Maybe you missed a major deadline at work, or you snapped at your partner, or you just completely failed at something you set out to do. What did the voice in your head sound like in the 5 minutes immediately following that failure?
It's usually brutal.
It is. Did you treat yourself with the baseline level of kindness that you would offer to a friend in the exact same situation? Because Mark's entire argument hinges on this baseline.
The friend test.
Yeah, if your friend made that exact same mistake, you wouldn't look them in the eye and tell them they're a worthless, incompetent failure who will never succeed.
You'd be a terrible friend if you did.
You would. You would tell them it's okay, that everyone messes up, and you'd help them figure out the next step. Yet we are so violently opposed to offering that same grace to ourselves.
It is a profound cognitive dissonance. We hold ourselves to a standard of perfection and ruthlessness that we would consider objectively cruel if we saw it applied to anyone else.
Why do we do that?
We operate under the false assumption that harsh self-criticism is the engine of accountability and success. We believe that if we don't punish ourselves, we will become lazy or complacent.
Oh, I totally do that. I think if I let myself off the hook, I'll never get anything done.
It's so common, but Mark's research suggests the exact opposite. Harsh self-criticism doesn't drive growth. It drives fear, avoidance, and burnout. Self-compassion is what actually provides the resilience needed to take accountability and try again.
Okay, so conceptualizing this is one thing. Understanding that we need to neutralize the poison of shame and build this inward-facing foundation sounds amazing in theory.
But putting it into practice is another story.
Exactly, because we are talking about rewiring decades of deeply ingrained habits. How do we actually do it? How do we stop the autoimmune attack when it's literally all we've ever known?
This is where the text gets very practical.
Yes, this transitions us perfectly into the final segment of the source material, which moves away from theory and provides a very specific 4-part actionable toolkit.
The praxis of compassion, moving it from abstract philosophy to daily tangible habit.
Let's walk through these 4 practices because they are incredibly specific and, I think, deceptively difficult. Practice number 1 is what the text calls the self-compassion pause.
This one is vital.
The instruction is straightforward. When you make a mistake, you must pause and ask yourself, what would I say to a friend in this situation? Then you have to actually say it to yourself.
It sounds so simple on paper.
It does, but I have to push back on the practicality of this. Because in the heat of a moment when the adrenaline is spiking because you just accidentally hit reply all on a sensitive email, or you just back your car into a pole, doing this pause feels near impossible.
Your brain is in full panic mode.
Right. In that specific microsecond, my brain is moving at a million miles an hour.
Yeah.
My default reflex isn't to be a warm, supportive friend to myself. My default reflex is immediate, visceral self-punishment. How do we overcome that physiological reflex?
Your observation about the reflex is exactly why the pause itself is the most critical and honestly the most physically demanding part of the practice. We have to look at the neurology of habit.
Okay, getting into the brain.
Over a lifetime, we have built neurological superhighways of self-criticism in our brains. Through repetition, the neural pathways associated with shame and self-blame have become heavily myelinated.
What does that mean, myelinated?
It means the electrical signals travel down them incredibly fast. It's insulated for speed. When an error occurs, the impulse in the brain travels down the path of least resistance, which is that superhighway of self-punishment. It is a fully automated reflex.
You don't have to think about it.
Nope. The pause that Mark advocates for serves as a manual circuit breaker.
A circuit breaker. You are trying to stop the electricity from reaching its usual destination.
You are forcefully interrupting the automated reflex. By forcing yourself to stop, take a breath, and deliberately ask the question, what would I say to a friend? You are manually diverting the electrical impulse away from the superhighway of shame.
Oh, wow.
And you're forcing it down a new, unpaved, unfamiliar path of self-kindness. It feels incredibly difficult, clunky, and even artificial at first because you are literally forging new neural pathways in real time.
You're bushwhacking through the brain.
Exactly. But the pause is what creates the space between stimulus and response. That space is where the choice to be compassionate exists.
You are choosing to respond deliberately rather than reacting on autopilot. It is the definition of empathy and action applied internally. Which brings us to the second practice in the toolkit, which moves the focus back outward.
Right, compassionate listening.
Yes. The force suggests a very specific exercise. Spend 5 minutes listening to someone without interrupting, and crucially, without offering any solutions, just providing presence.
Of all the practices Mark outlines, this might be the most challenging for modern individuals to master. We are a heavily solution-oriented culture.
Oh, absolutely. I struggle with this constantly. If a friend comes to me and says, I'm incredibly stressed about this project at work, my boss is being unreasonable, I feel like I'm drowning, my immediate urge is to fix it.
You want to solve the puzzle.
My brain instantly goes into project manager mode. Like, okay, let's look at your calendar. Let's draft an email to your boss together. Let's delegate these 3 tasks. And I think I'm being helpful. I think I'm being a good friend. Is Mark suggesting that my helpfulness is actually a failure of compassion?
It requires a hard look at our own motivations, to be honest. Often, the compulsion to fix a problem is born out of our own discomfort with the other person's suffering.
Wait, really? It's about me.
A lot of the time, yes. When we see someone we care about in distress, it triggers our own anxiety. We experience emotional resonance. Our desire to fix the problem is frequently a selfish defense mechanism. We want to eliminate their distress primarily so that our own secondary anxiety will end.
We just want the discomfort in the room to go away.
Exactly. But remember Mark's baseline definition of compassion. It is not about erasing the pain, it is about sharing the burden. When you immediately jump to offering solutions, you are bypassing the empathy entirely.
By trying to fix it, I'm subtly telling them that their pain is a problem to be solved quickly, rather than a valid emotional experience that I am willing to sit in with them.
You are standing on the shore, throwing them a manual on how to swim instead of getting in the water with them.
Ouch. That's a great callback, but ouch.
It's hard to hear. Offering just presence, simply listening, acknowledging the validity of their feelings, and holding space without trying to engineer a way out is incredibly difficult because it requires us to tolerate the discomfort of unresolved pain.
It requires us to sit in the mud with them.
Yes, but it is profoundly more healing for the person suffering. It validates their reality and builds that bridge of shared humanity we discussed earlier. It tells them, your pain is not too much for me. You are not alone.
That is a staggering reevaluation of what it means to be a good friend. Just sitting in the mud. Which leads us to the third practice in the toolkit, acts of kindness.
A classic, but reframed.
Yeah. The text recommends committing to doing one small act of kindness each day. It lists things like a simple smile, sending a quick supportive message, or helping someone with a minor task.
This practice serves a very specific function in Mark's framework. It reinforces a vital claim made in the source material, which is that compassion grows with practice.
I want to look at the scale of this, though. A smile, a quick text message. In the grand scheme of suffering we've been discussing, crushing burdens, chronic stress, profound isolation, does a daily smile actually do anything structural, or are we back to the fresh coat of paint?
It's a fair question. We have to view this through the lens of progressive resistance training. Compassion is not a finite resource that you are either born with or you lack. It is a muscle. If you do not use a muscle, it atrophies. If you wait until a massive crisis occurs to try and lift the 50-pound boulder of someone else's suffering, you will tear a muscle. You won't have the capacity for it.
Because you haven't been working out.
Exactly. By committing to one small act of kindness every single day, you are engaging in daily resistance training for your empathy. You are strengthening your reticular activating system, the part of the brain that filters information to actively scan your environment for opportunities to connect rather than scanning for threats.
So the scale of the act is irrelevant.
Completely irrelevant. It is the consistency of the repetition that builds the muscle. By smiling at a stranger or sending a supportive text, you are repeatedly firing the neural pathways associated with noticing and responding. Over time, that conscious, deliberate daily effort becomes an unconscious, ingrained habit.
So you are building the structural strength required to carry the heavier burdens when the storms inevitably hit.
You're pouring the concrete for the foundation one cup at a time.
I love that. Okay, the final practice detailed in the source is a compassion meditation. It involves sitting quietly and repeating a very specific traditional mantra. The text provides the exact phrasing. May I be free from suffering. May others be free from suffering.
This raises an important question, doesn't it? When we analyze the exact structural syntax of that mantra, we have to ask why Mark emphasizes phrasing it in this precise manner.
It's the balance of it, I think. It holds both the internal self and the external world in the exact same thought, given equal weight. May I, and then immediately may others.
Yes, and that reflects the core thematic architecture of the entire deep dive today. That mantra obliterates the false dichotomy that society has constructed between self-care and altruism.
Right, because we usually separate them.
Often we are conditioned to view compassion as a zero-sum game. We believe that if I am focusing on my own healing and my own self-compassion, I am being selfish and neglecting the needs of others.
Or, conversely, we believe that if I am a truly good, compassionate person, I must constantly serve others to the point of sacrificing my own well-being. It is either me or them.
Which inevitably leads to burnout or resentment.
Always. You can't sustain it.
But this meditation forces the practitioner to hold the self and the community in equal measure. It insists, structurally, that you are just as deserving of freedom from suffering as anyone else in the world. It states that your healing is inextricably linked to the healing of others.
Because you can't build a bridge to others if your side of the foundation is crumbling.
Exactly. And your side of the foundation has no purpose if it doesn't eventually connect to someone else. The mantra unifies the inward and outward practices.
So what does this all mean? If we zoom out and look at this dense, incredibly rich set of excerpts from the Inner Horizon, what is the ultimate blueprint we're walking away with?
We are walking away with a complete mechanical redefinition of how we interact with the world and ourselves. We have dismantled the idea that compassion is an aesthetic, passive niceness.
We've learned that compassion is an active, deliberate, courageous choice. It is empathy in action. It is the structural bridge we build to share the heavy burdens of existence so that no one has to be crushed under the physiological and psychological weight of isolation.
And we've seen that this bridge has to start internally.
Yeah, that self-compassion is the specific, necessary antidote required to neutralize the paralyzing autoimmune poison of shame. And finally, we've learned that this isn't just a grand philosophy to ponder. It is a daily, gritty discipline.
A muscle built through friction.
Right. A muscle built through the painful friction of the pause, through the profound discomfort of silent presence, through the daily reps of tiny acts of kindness, and through a meditation that equalizes our own value with the value of the rest of humanity.
And through all of this analysis, the most poignant and realistic reminder from Mark's research remains right at the center. Compassion does not fix everything. It does not magically erase the tragedies, the failures, or the objective pain of the human experience.
But it fundamentally, biologically, and psychologically changes how we carry those burdens.
It changes everything about the load.
Which leaves me with one final thought for you, our listener, to take with you as you close this out. and step back into your day. We've established through the text that compassion doesn't change the objective weight of the boulder. It only changes how we carry it by sharing the load and removing the terror of isolation.
Right.
So let's run a thought experiment to scale this up. Everything we've discussed today has been focused on the individual, how you change your inner monologue, how you listen to a friend. But what happens to our society if we take this blueprint and apply it macroscopically?
Ooh, that's a big question.
What if we started building systems, our corporate workplaces, our digital and social media spaces, our civic infrastructures that structurally assume everyone interacting within them is walking around carrying a heavy, invisible burden?
It would completely change our cultural baseline.
How would our world fundamentally change if empathy in action wasn't just something you tried to remember to do after making a personal mistake, but was the actual default operating system of our culture?
Imagine that.
Imagine an email thread or a morning commute or a quarterly performance review that was built from the ground up on the assumption that everyone involved was in desperate need of that bridge. If the baseline assumption of our society wasn't competition or aesthetic niceness, but shared vulnerability.
A fascinating question to consider, and honestly, a necessary challenge for all of us.
As you navigate the rest of your week, I want you to ponder how you might design your own small corner of the world with this blueprint. How can you lay down just one structural plank of that bridge today?
It starts with one plank.
We'll leave you to think on that. Thanks for going deep with us. We'll see you next time.